Today we're diving into the story of the X's and O's told through the words of Snail Games, ARK's publisher, and through their latest earnings call. They talked survival evolved, survival ascended, how they performed or fell short, ending it up with a statement of who is pulling the levers of power. Now, luckily for you, there's no reading required of the near 122 pages of this financial report, but there's some interesting information buried in here we need to talk about today. Thanks so much for the awesome support you showed my last ARK upload, and let's see if we can keep that momentum going with today's. If you want to support the channel, please hit subscribe and ring the notifications bell so you never miss my future upload alerts. And so, let's get stuck into the insanity that is Snail Games and ARK. As mentioned in the intro, Snail Games, the overall owners of the ARK IP, and of course the studio behind that, Studio Wildcard, conducted their quarter 4 and end of the year 2024 financial call yesterday. And by the way, I've been on hundreds of these calls in the past, so when it comes to their public statements and information posted in these SEC filings, Snail Games is legally obligated to tell the truth, but that doesn't mean they won't try to get a little creative with how they show it to you. For instance, take the opening volley front and center as Snail Games presents the past versus the present, survival evolved versus survival ascended. And watch now as they compare apples to oranges, and listen very carefully to this wording. Since its launch, ARK Survival Ascended sold 3.4 million units and has an average of 94,000 daily active users, they define that as DAUs, with a peak of 308,000 DAUs. Now versus what they have to say for Survival Evolved. In the 3 months and year ended December 31st, 2024, ARK Survival Evolved averaged a total of 136,000 DAUs and 135,000 DAUs respectively. ARK Survival Evolved units sold were approximately 621,000 for the fourth quarter 2024 as compared to 745,000 units during the same period in 2023. And finally, units sold for the year ended December 31st, 2024 were approximately 2.3 million as compared to 4.4 million units during the year ended December 31st, 2023. I know there's a lot of numbers and dates I just threw at you in rapid order, but did you catch all that? Because in political theater, what Snail just did is called spin, turning negatives into positives by altering the wording and comparing two different things. You see, for Survival Ascended, it's all about lifetime stats. Units sold since launch, which by the way started in October 2023 on Steam PC and has continued into 2025. And then they show you lifetime DAUs or daily active users. Also, a bit of context here, and this is just based on my personal experience attending investors' calls, but when a publisher is pushing DAU counts, it can normally indicate that the hard sales numbers are not where they, the publisher, wants them to be, so they flash a shiny thing over here to attract your attention, which in this case are the DAUs. Anyways, back to the stats, and now over to the oranges in this comparo, Survival Evolved. And for the DAUs, they reference just quarter 4, not lifetime, and immediately Survival Evolved outclasses ASA. Units sold, again, Snail throws quarter 4 stats at you, whereas they didn't for ASA. And finally, Survival Evolved 2024 sales numbers of 2.3 million units compared to Survival Ascended's lifetime units sold. Okay, I know what some of you are saying out there right now. Too many dates, DAUs, too many numbers. What in the hell does this all mean, Buzz? Well, and I'm not a financial analyst, I'm just going to let you know that up front, but when I see this kind of misaligned comparison, lifetime versus restricted to a financial year, all these DAUs, etc., it says to me in plain terms that the new game, ASA, is not selling as well as they'd like, and the old game, ASE, the game they tried to kill so they could sell the new game back to the players, well, yeah, that one is still holding strong, and in many regards outperforming the latest and greatest on Unreal Engine 5, known as ARK Survival Ascended. So it's the truth, it's just brought to you in a way that paints the picture the way Snail wants to show it to you. In terms of Snail's financials, again, we've got millions of figures here you can sift through, categories, assets, liabilities, but the general idea is that compared to 2023 and 2024, Snail made less and also has less liabilities now, indicating they are attempting to streamline their efforts and tighten their belts. Now, what that means for Studio Wildcard, I honestly can't say, but recently we've seen public outcry about the Lost Colony DLC and that price tag, which, yeah, is steep. $30 can buy you a lot of DLC. For instance, for $10 more, you could have picked up Shadow of the Erdtree, which is a monstrous amount of content. Personally, I was a big Battlefield 4 player, and back in the day with that one, you could go for the premium edition and pick up all the DLC maps in one shot. And I've got to be honest, I didn't look up the price, but at the time, I think it was something like $50 USD, but you got all 5 map packs like Dragon's Teeth and Naval Strike, along with a bunch of other modes, weapons, and vehicles. I mean, honestly, it was a ton of content and hundreds, if not thousands of hours of playtime you could engage with. By comparison, Studio Wildcard has already made it public that Lost Colony will be retailing at $30 USD, while the entirety of the base game of Survival Ascended is just over $40. So there's that price discrepancy they've got to deal with. But a point we've also seen made on social media is that Studio Wildcard needs the money, and the players should support them by picking up this upcoming DLC. But there's also this point that's not being made in this argument, and it involves Snail Games, the publisher, but also the owner of Studio Wildcard. They decide the funding amounts and the revenue shares, if that still is a thing, and those, by the way, are kept private. Snail does say that they pay SDE, the parent company of Studio Wildcard, X amount of millions per map or DLC delivered. But again, what is not made public is how much of that then trickles down to Wildcard for things like dev salaries, new hires, and all the rest. In fact, this would be a great topic for chat. Do you look at ARK Lost Colony and that $30 price tag and think that's a reasonable price to pay, or do you feel it is overpriced? Leave me a comment and let's see where the community falls on this one. One fact that is not left to chance in these financials is the controlling party of everything ARK, which comes down to just one person: founder, co-chief executive officer, chief strategy officer, and chairman, Mr. Shi. I mention this because in previous end-of-the-year statements, the same information is also disclosed, but it's a bit buried in a full list of bullet points. But here, in this financial, Snail has brought this point out and made it a headline. They've brought it out front and center, almost in an attempt to squash those public outcries for Snail to sell ARK and Studio Wildcard. Here, just listen to this statement. We are a controlled company under the corporate governance rules of NASDAQ, and as a result qualify for and rely on exemptions from certain corporate governance requirements. Since we elected to rely on the exemptions available to a, quote, controlled company, they're saying you, the stockholders, do not have the same protections afforded to stockholders of companies that are subject to such corporate governance requirements. They then go on to say that they have elected not to follow normal business requirements for how the board of directors is comprised, how nominations to the board are made, or even the formation of a compensation committee, going on to emphatically put an exclamation point on the entire affair with this, quote, Mr. Shi, our founder, co-chief executive officer, chief strategy officer, and chairman, controls us, and his ownership of our common stock prevents you and other stockholders from influencing significant decisions. So, translation, when it comes down to business decisions, it's him. He can determine the outcome of stockholder decisions, and at times, he will engage in activities where his interests do not align or even conflict with other stockholders. So when that discussion of supporting Studio Wildcard surfaces again, and how by purchasing this ARK Lost Colony DLC, you're going to be directly supporting the studio, which I think in theory is all well and good, you need to remember who is influencing those decisions at the head of the company. Now here on the channel, I've said it many times, I want the best for the ARK franchise and its millions upon millions of loyal fans, but Wildcard is just one small cog in this giant snail machine with a single majority controlling party. There are, of course, multiple stages to everything, like those funds transfers, greenlining projects, which, by the way, Snail does mention further funds being allocated to receive outside help on their For the Stars game, their new Web3 sci-fi survival game. Anyways, back to the ARK topic. Purchasing ARK products buying stock in the company, it all goes to the CEO, where he makes the decisions on what to fund, what not to fund, and how to proceed. So just keep that fact in the back of your mind, because Snail, now with the boldening of this topic and bringing it out front and center, is making it crystal clear to the gamers who runs the show. And to kind of wrap this whole thing up, I also wanted to bring up the topic of the controversial ARK Aquatica Survival Evolved DLC, and of course, ARK 2. But first, let's kick it all off with Aquatica, and Snail has basically skirted around that topic entirely, but it's expected. Now, one of the board members at Snail briefly mentions Aquatica during his presentation, but on the topic of the AI slop trailer, the fallout, and what happened with all of that afterwards, they make no mention of it. But what really stuck out to me was the total absence of anything spoken or printed about ARK 2. Now, this is a major selling point to potential investors. A completely new and redesigned ARK experience still clinging to one of the top spots on Steam's most wishlisted games charts, and here Snail makes zero reference to the game. Even the one investor who's allowed to ask questions, from Noble Capital, made no attempt to press Snail's board about anything ARK 2 related. Other than some basic licensing agreements which reference the game and have been in the financials for quite a while, there's actually zero mention outside of that. Now, in the past, we heard at the time the CEO of Snail saying that ARK 2 would be arriving in late 2024, which is of course come and gone. It's also been mentioned that the game would be arriving in spring 2025, and recently, Studio Wildcard, when they were preemptively washing their hands of Aquatica, also confirmed they were committed to working on both ASA and ARK 2. But here, on this Snail investors call, when you would most want to instill confidence in potential investors and get their money invested into your company, Snail acted like they had never heard of the game, which, as someone that has been on many of these calls, I kept waiting for them to drop an ARK 2 bombshell, and it never happened, which really stuck out to me, and I wanted to bring that to your attention. There was also zero mention of Survival Ascended and when it will be moving over to Unreal Engine 5.5, which, by the way, Snail loves to reference and has done so in many of their previous statements. For that expected by March upgrade, the next update for that is expected in this week's Community Crunch, but with it not being delivered yet, I'm already bracing for another delay announcement. Remember to hit subscribe and ring that notifications bell to receive my future upload alerts. All my socials, including links to today's sources, can be found in the video description. And until the next one, this is LtBuzzLitebeer, signing off.